Have you ever looked at your paycheck and wondered where all your hard-earned money went? We all know about taxes, but have you ever questioned how they're actually collected? The truth is, a significant portion of your income is silently siphoned away before you even get your hands on it. This system, known as tax withholding, has a controversial history, one often intertwined with the government's use of war as a justification. We're conditioned to accept this as normal, but is it really? Should the government have the power to take money directly from our paychecks, often without our explicit consent? This practice raises fundamental questions about individual liberty, economic freedom, and the role of government in our lives. Over the next few minutes, we'll delve into the history of tax withholding, exposing its origins and exploring its lasting impact on the American working class. This isn't just about numbers on a pay stub, it's about power, control, and the delicate balance between individual rights and collective responsibility. We'll uncover how a wartime measure initially intended as temporary became a permanent fixture in our financial lives. Join us as we peel back the layers of this often overlooked system and confront the uncomfortable truths it reveals about our relationship with the government. Through historical analysis and real-life examples, we'll shed light on the justifications given for tax withholding, examining whether they hold up under scrutiny. This journey will challenge your assumptions and empower you to view your paycheck, not just as a source of income, but as a battleground for economic justice. The story of tax withholding begins with a crisis. As the United States entered World War II, the government faced the daunting task of financing a costly war effort. The solution? Reach directly into the pockets of working Americans, justifying it as a patriotic duty to support the troops. Thus, the modern system of tax withholding was born. Previously, citizens paid their taxes in lump sums, often struggling to come up with large amounts of money all at once. Withholding, however, allowed the government to collect taxes incrementally, deducting a portion from each paycheck. This steady stream of revenue proved crucial in funding the war, but it came at a cost. While the government argued that withholding was necessary for the war effort, critics saw it as a dangerous expansion of government power. They argued that it eroded individual autonomy and created a system where citizens were essentially forced to lend money to the government, often without their full understanding or consent. Despite these concerns, withholding was touted as a patriotic duty, and those who questioned it were often labeled as unpatriotic or even treasonous. This wartime propaganda proved effective, and the public largely accepted the new system, albeit with some grumbling. Little did they know that this temporary war measure would have far-reaching consequences, shaping the financial landscape for generations to come. As the dust settled after World War II, many expected the intrusive practice of tax withholding to be repealed. After all, the war was over, the justification for this unprecedented measure seemingly gone. However, the government, having grown accustomed to the steady flow of revenue, had other plans.
Instead of dismantling the system, they chose to retain it, arguing that it was necessary to fund various social programs and maintain a strong national defense. This decision marked a turning point in the relationship between the government and its citizens, solidifying the practice of tax withholding as a permanent fixture in American life. The justifications for withholding may have shifted from wartime necessity to peacetime spending, but the underlying principle remained the same: the government claiming the right to take a portion of citizens' earnings before they even received them.
This decision had profound implications, shaping the financial realities of every working American and fundamentally altering the power dynamic between the government and the governed. Over the following decades, the system of tax withholding would become deeply entrenched in the American economy, its tendrils reaching into every paycheck, every business, every financial transaction. The story of tax withholding, however, is far from over. It continues to spark debate and fuel movements seeking to restore financial autonomy to the hands of the people. The year is 1943. The United States, deeply embroiled in World War II, faces a financial crisis of unprecedented proportions. The cost of waging war on multiple fronts is staggering, and the government needs a way to raise funds quickly and efficiently. The introduction of payroll withholding.
Prior to World War II, the concept of the government deducting taxes directly from paychecks was unheard of. viewed with confusion and apprehension. Propaganda posters sprung up across the nation, depicting brave soldiers storming beaches. Supporting the war effort was a moral imperative.
This marked a fundamental shift in the government's approach to taxation. Money they had rightfully earned through their labor, this new reality, presented as a temporary wartime necessity, would have far-reaching consequences, shaping the financial landscape of the nation for generations to come.
With the stroke of a pen, the government ushered in a new era of taxation, placing the burden on the working class.
A massive propaganda campaign reframed withholding as a patriotic act of sacrifice.
Posters implored, "Don't let them down," showcasing soldiers relying on financial support.
Every dollar withheld was a dollar closer to victory, safeguarding freedom and democracy.
Radio broadcasts echoed these sentiments, urging listeners to embrace withholding as their patriotic duty.
As the war ended, many believed withholding would be abolished.
The war effort was over, but the government had other plans.
Withholding became a permanent fixture, funding defense and social programs.
This marked a pivotal moment, embedding withholding into the peacetime economy. Despite the government's efforts to normalize withholding and portray it as a necessary component of a thriving post-war society, cracks began to appear in the facade of public acceptance. A small but vocal contingent of citizens, wary of the government's expanding reach into their personal lives, began to voice their dissent. These early challengers to withholding argued that it represented a fundamental violation of individual liberty and economic freedom. They contended that the government had no right to confiscate a portion of one's earnings before they even had a chance to receive it, likening the practice to indentured servitude. Their protests, though often drowned out by the prevailing narrative of post-war optimism and prosperity, highlighted the growing unease felt by some Americans. They questioned the justification for continuing a wartime measure in times of peace and expressed concerns about the potential for abuse and government overreach. These early dissenters faced an uphill battle. The government, wielding the powerful tools of propaganda and public perception, successfully painted those who opposed withholding as out-of-touch radicals, individuals who failed to grasp the complexities of managing a modern economy. Their voices, though initially muted, would help to plant the seeds of a movement that would continue to question and challenge the legitimacy of withholding for decades to come.
Post-World War II, America thrived economically. Tax withholding, initially a wartime measure, became a permanent fixture.
Each payday, wages were reduced by withholding, funding government projects and the military-industrial complex.
This shift went largely unnoticed as Americans embraced post-war consumerism.
The government framed withholding as essential for national progress, expanding its influence significantly. With withholding firmly established as a permanent fixture of the American tax system, the government embarked on a multifaceted campaign to solidify public acceptance and quell any lingering doubts.
They crafted a compelling narrative, one that linked the deduction of taxes from paychecks directly to the nation's burgeoning prosperity and the promise of a brighter future for all.
Through public service announcements, educational films, and carefully worded speeches, government officials extolled the virtues of withholding, emphasizing its role in funding essential services such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure.
They argued that by contributing a portion of their earnings up front, citizens were not merely paying taxes, but actively investing in the collective good, ensuring a higher standard of living for themselves and future generations.
This message resonated strongly in the optimistic climate of the post-war era. Americans, eager to believe in a brighter future after years of war and deprivation, embraced the notion that their withheld taxes were being put to good use, building a stronger, more prosperous nation.
The government, capitalizing on this sentiment, subtly shifted the focus away from the individual burden of taxation and towards the collective benefits it purportedly provided.
This narrative, however, masked a fundamental truth. Withholding had fundamentally altered the power dynamic between the government and the governed. The government, by assuming control over a portion of every worker's earnings before they even received it, had gained an unprecedented level of financial leverage, allowing it to shape national priorities and dictate spending without the need for direct and transparent consent from the taxpayers themselves. Withholding shifted wealth from the working class to the government, expanding its reach without direct taxation scrutiny.
This system normalized reduced net incomes, dulling awareness of government costs and easing spending increases.
The complexity of the tax code obscured the true tax burden, reducing transparency and accountability. This environment allowed government spending to grow unchecked, shaping American society.
Section 4. Cracks in the facade. The seeds of resistance begin to sprout. Despite the government's success in normalizing withholding, early dissenters' seeds of discontent began to take root. Fiscal conservatives and social justice advocates both called for greater transparency and a fairer tax system. These early rumblings of discontent would eventually coalesce into a powerful movement for tax reform.
Section 1. The working class caught in the wheels of withholding. The system of tax withholding has become a deeply ingrained aspect of American life. Yet beneath this normalcy lies a profound imbalance, placing a disproportionate burden on the working class. The gradual nature of withholding can mask the true impact of taxation, perpetuating economic inequality.
Section 2. The price of convenience, erosion of financial literacy and awareness. The normalization of tax withholding has come at a steep cost, eroding financial literacy. When taxes are an abstract concept, it becomes easy to detach from the true cost of government. This erosion of financial literacy has created fertile ground for exploitation and financial instability.
Section 3. The illusion of choice. Navigating a complex and opaque system. Navigating the labyrinthine tax code can be daunting, especially for the working class. The forms are often confusing, and the process of claiming deductions can be time-consuming. This complexity fuels distrust and resentment towards the government and the tax system.
Section 4. A seed of rebellion movements. Challenging the withholding status quo. A growing movement is challenging the legitimacy of tax withholding, demanding transparency and control. Grassroots organizations are educating communities and advocating for financial literacy and economic justice. This movement is gaining traction, highlighting the regressive nature of the current system.
Section 5. The fight for transparency, demanding clarity and accountability. The movement challenging tax withholding is about reclaiming financial agency and demanding transparency. We need clearer information about where our tax dollars are going and mechanisms to hold officials accountable. The fight for tax justice is a fight for a more just and equitable society.
The unseen shackles, reflecting on a century of withholding. What began as a temporary measure has evolved into a system that shapes the financial lives of Americans. The normalization of withholding has fostered financial disengagement and hidden the true cost of government. This lack of transparency has allowed unchecked government spending, burdening the working class.
A nation divided, the economic and social costs of withholding. The legacy of tax withholding has exacerbated income inequality and eroded social trust. The working class often lacks the resources to navigate the tax code, perpetuating financial instability. This lack of financial literacy creates vulnerability to predatory practices and hinders wealth building.
Reclaiming our birthright, a call to action for financial freedom. It's time to reclaim our financial agency and demand greater transparency from our government. We must educate ourselves about withholding and support initiatives promoting financial literacy. This is about transforming our relationship with money and government for a more just society.
Towards a more just future, reimagining taxation for the common good. We must view taxation as a collective investment in society's well-being. Imagine a system where tax revenue funds tangible community improvements and prioritizes financial literacy. The future depends on challenging the status quo and creating a fair tax system reflecting our values.